I won't bore you with my background any further than I have already, but we were awarded a grant through NCDA this past year that will start in 2021 and carry on through actually the middle of 2023. It's myself, Gina Fernandez, Sarah Villani, and Penny Perkins. Um, Really excited about the potential for this project, and I think my interest in trying to identify and address these current limitations and yield potential, specifically for me as a horticulturist, really came about through some of our previous work with plant growth regulators, particularly. And then certainly with the addition of Sarah Villani, our great plant pathologist here, that's started to work with caneberry growers within the past year or two, wanted to make sure that there'd be great opportunity here to address maybe some of the issues that last set of survey questions really hit home on, which is that there's concerns about resistance management, there's concerns about related to seeing cane die back after tipping, and trying to see if we can develop some strategies that would be more sustainable in blackberry production systems. So again, this transpired from some work that I did with Plant Growth Regulator. I know I spoke to this group last year, but we evaluated a plant growth regulator to try and reduce primocane growth and manage vegetative growth of blackberry. But one thing that really stood out to me is in a simple comparison between an untreated control, tipping, and our prohexadione calcium treatments. There were no differences across in yield. And I realize that tipping is currently the best practice that we have to stimulate lateral branch development in blackberry, which is related to productivity in blackberry. But this just really surprised me. I know it's just a single year of a single trial, but to not see a response from tipping was quite surprising. And if anything, there's a negative numerical trend here associated with tipping or with our prohexadione calcium treatment as it relates to yield. So that made me think that maybe we need to rethink this to some extent, and certainly conversations with some growers and certainly a great researcher based out of USDA Kearneysville, Fumi Takada, looking at some of the work that he's done was quite inspirational as well. So Fumi, over the past of the course 6 years or so, has been looking at cane bending and defoliation as a potential set of practices to help improve the productivity of primocane fruiting blackberry and raspberry. Fumi's looked at basically this bending strategy along paired with defoliation or without defoliation in some cases. And what he's observed is whenever you bend these canes over, you see a really strong reaction and a proliferation of these short little lateral shoots that develop with that bending response there. And in many cases, these short little shoots or these laterals terminate in a flower cluster, which is really exciting work. And just a close up here of that same strong response. The quality of the fruiting wood is a little bit better as you are closer to the location of that bending site. But at any rate, just some really exciting work by him. And it's kind of hard to see this picture, but if you kind of look at some of the terminals there, you can see some flowers and fruits and just a really positive response there. And this lends itself and is similar into many other to many other training systems and other fruit cropping systems. There's been quite a bit of work with cherry and with apple and with pear to try and utilize the tree's architecture to your advantage. You know, if you're having a struggle with managing vigor, to try and devigorate that by implementing pruning and training practices that then result in basically a narrow tree wall that has a simple architecture that allows for a lot of benefits for spray deposition within the canopy, for light relations within the canopy, and hopefully with improved fruit quality. Just some preliminary data from some of the work that Fumi's done. So this was a trial on Primark 45, where he looked at effects of tipping, an untreated control, and also just bending alone. And you can see the cumulative yields over time were the greatest with the bent treatment as compared to tipping or the control. And similar to what we observed, there really wasn't much of an incentive or tremendous response as it relates to yield with the tipping treatment as compared to the control. Looking at this, a different set of treatments on Traveler, looking at the effect of defoliation alone. Again, he saw a positive response whenever mid-season he would go through and actually physically remove all of the leaves on these primocanes and saw a tremendous increase in yield response. And that defoliation step might seem quite odd and unnatural, and it really is, especially in the middle of the season. But the reason for that input is that by removing that leaf area, it releases all of those lateral buds from dormancy. So there's a step called paradormancy, which means it's kind of a summer dormancy that some other response needs to occur, or activity, whether it's bending or defoliation or combinations thereof, to break those buds and release those buds from dormancy. And as you're all aware, these primocane fruiting blackberry cultivars have a very upright, apically dominant growth habit to them, and they'll terminate in a flower cluster right on the top of a solitary cane if you don't manipulate them in any way. So Fumi went through and did some really clean work here to look at these effects and see if there could be any utility in primocane fruiting systems, and certainly has some positive data to support these ideas. He's published a more recent paper there. And what he did in this work is he looked at the timing of training and bending these primocanes, and also the effect of defoliation. And his best set of treatments were whenever he selected the first 10 primocanes that reached the lower wire, removed the rest of the primocanes in that system, and then trained them to a horizontal position. And he observed an increase in flower shoots by 64% by training these early developing primocanes in this system. And despite that increase in the number of flower shoots, whenever he looked at this a little bit more closely, he didn't impact flower number or yield in this particular study, which was intriguing. And some of this he relates in his discussion to maybe the timing of bending and defoliation and maybe an interaction there. So there's certainly some positive information here, certainly a lot of questions, I think, that need further investigation. And what we hope to do in the next 2 years is at least try and evaluate these strategies in our production systems here in the Southeast and see if they're valuable at all. I'd much rather make these mistakes at a research station than on one of your farms, because no matter what, I get a check at the end of the month, where if you're relying on this production. So I'd much rather do this here. Basic question here and goal of this project from a horticultural perspective is to understand if we can improve productivity of primocane fruiting blackberry without double cropping or tipping. So again, trying to get away from basically tipping is just a modified heading cut, which does stimulate lateral branch production, but at the same juncture, it also decreases or reduces light relations in that lower canopy. So I think there's a lot to go here, or a lot of improvements that could be made with light canopy distribution in these systems. So I know this is a lot to look at, but basically I really want you to focus on these three treatment effects in bold up here: bending, defoliation, and plant growth regulator inputs. And those are the three key factors that we're going to evaluate in our trial over the course of the next 2 years. And we're going to look at all possible combinations of these three factors and inputs and compare that to a double cropping system, because for some of the growers that I've discussed primocane fruiting cultivars with, they feel that that's the only way that they can obtain the yields required to continue to grow primocane fruiting blackberries, where others, clearly by the survey data, grow this exclusively as a primocane fruiting or single cropping system. So unfortunately, the pandemic kind of set our trajectory off a little bit this year. We had a separate project that was funded to really optimize the rates of 6BA and GA3, which in a former study conducted in the 1990s suggested that by Archibald in Kentucky demonstrated that combination of plant growth regulator can really have a promotive effect on lateral branch development and also release these buds from paradormancy. which is what we want to do, and see if we can avoid that defoliation step, because with that defoliation step, in some years that can dramatically delay the timing of fruiting. And if you have a late fruiting variety to begin with, that might be a bad thing. Or for some markets, based on how volatile they are, that might be a positive thing too. And we're going to look at this fairly comprehensively, looking at light interception and distribution within these canopies, of course, impacts on yield, fruit quality, and storage potential, and then delve into the impacts of these treatments on cane architecture, leaf area, lateral fruit number, and really understand what we're doing with each of these inputs. The second part of this project, which I wish I had more time to discuss and more technical background to do so appropriately, would be related to disease management. And I think that this part of the project is almost more exciting than what I propose to do horticulturally, because I think that there are some gaps here in these programs and some opportunities to also combine some chemical or cultural practices with your disease management strategies to help optimize management of key diseases within blackberry production, and understand if we can get away again from tipping, and if some of the PG plant growth regulators that we utilize can basically reduce the incidence of cane dieback associated with cane blight or botrytis or other issues. As usual, there are some growers that are ahead of the curve compared to where we're at as researchers. And Dalton Rhodes is a grower that I've leaned on quite heavily in my short time working in the world of blackberry. And he sent me this picture yesterday of an Osage field that he had already done some really interesting work with cane bending. And you can see this really phenomenal response with these lateral branches developing from these bent canes on Osage. These will all be his floricanes for this year. And essentially he's already got a fruiting wall established right there. It'll be really fascinating to see where this lands and how it works out for him. He estimated that his bud number was increased per linear foot from 60 to 100 bud per linear foot with this practice already. So again, really, really interesting to follow this. And I'm not sure if Dalton's on the call, but he would be able to describe a little bit more of what he's done here. Dalton, are you on the call or no? I didn't see his name earlier, but he might have been under a different surname there.
Yeah, I wasn't sure he was here either, because sometimes you're under a different name when you log in.
Well, I'll have to pick his brain later and just distribute a little bit of what he's done. But just the effect here is a really narrow, planar, simplified canopy at the start of his season here. And again, we'll be tracking this along with him to really understand what's going on. Really exciting work there. There are about 6 minutes or so left in this, and I just want to quickly breeze through another idea that we're planning to pursue this year, which is use of reflective ground covers to help optimize canopy light distribution. I do see a couple things in the chat. Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't pertaining to Dalton's inputs there, but light distribution within fruit crop canopies is very important. And even in systems where we have the benefit of dwarfing rootstocks, like in apple and in pear, there's even a zone of inadequate light where we see poor fruit quality. I love this picture here. It was taken by Don Elfing back in the 80s. And this is some McIntosh right there at the timing of harvest, which apple growers, of course, benefit from either single harvest events or in some cases 2 or 3 at most. But this was McIntosh right before harvest, and he had his technician go out and remove all the leaves on the tree to really illustrate the effects of light distribution on fruit color and quality. And you can see here quite clearly that there's kind of this cone of inadequate light distribution within those canopies. And you know, there's certainly a high threshold of light, per incident light required for fruit quality and color in apple. Less light's required to have sufficient flowering and photosynthesis, but nonetheless, inadequate light can have negative effects on productivity. And that's certainly true in blackberry. And with many of our blackberry training and production systems, our canopies, despite intensive practices, can have a complex, disorganized architecture, particularly in that interior canopy with poor light distribution. Now, rubus is amazingly shade tolerant, and reading back on some of the work that Gina had done back in the early 90s and some others, just really fascinating to see how this specific crop can tolerate and continue to produce fruit without limitation in this situation. But there are other papers that suggest that excessive shading can also have some of these same negative effects on productivity, fruit quality, spray penetration, and also in our case now in the year of 2021, some potential issues with an area of the canopy or microclimate that's really conducive to SWD infestation or pathogen development. So we have plans this upcoming year to investigate the use of these reflective fabrics, not in the world of apple, but in the world of blackberry. We did some work in apple in the past 3 years to look at some different commercially available reflective fabrics. Now these fabrics are woven, heavy duty materials that last usually 5 to 7 years in the orchard system. You can drive over these materials with your tractors. They're designed to be part of that system for an entire season if need be, or in some cases, if you're just trying to improve fruit quality and color in apple, you might deploy these just 5 weeks before anticipated harvest. So there'll be some questions about optimal timing, but I don't want to bore you with data here, but I just wanted to indicate that these fabrics all have different reflective properties. All of the fabrics that we've evaluated reflect PAR light, which is the visible light spectrum, and also the part of the light spectrum that plants really utilize for photosynthesis and other processes. They all perform very similarly, but UV light, there's quite a range of effects, whether it's on a sunny day, which would be the light intensity by this orange line, or a completely cloudy day, which is light intensity indicated by this yellow line. The blue bars correspond with the orange high intensity day, where the yellow corresponds with the gray, which is our low light intensity day. At any rate, you can see that one of our treatments really reflected a lot of UV light, which was this Extende fabric, as compared to Lumillies, which is a fabric made in Belgium. So a wide range of reflective properties available in these materials, which would be worth investigating. Limited work done on this in blackberry that's been published, one paper up in New Brunswick, Canada. So certainly not a similar climate at all to the southeastern United States. So based on their observations, they saw some pretty dramatic increases in marketable yield, and especially when combined with rain shelters. It was over a 3-fold increase in yield whenever they were under a rain shelter, which might lend itself to people who are growing tunnels, growing blackberries in tunnels in different parts of the state. They did observe some reduction in spur blight infected tissues, but this was an organically managed planning where they did all this work, and they didn't see any impacts on botrytis or shelf life. So if we get some funding for this project, and I'm ornery enough that even if we don't, we're going to put out at least one trial in North Carolina with a grower here in the mountains. But we have a strong team, both in North Carolina and South Carolina, that are willing to participate in this, with myself, Karen, Hannah Barak, Gina, Jeff Hopkins down at Clemson, Juan Carlos Melgar, Penny Perkins, Guido Schnabel, and Sarah Villani. So an interdisciplinary team to look at the effects of these fabrics on canopy microclimate, yield, fruit quality, and also incidence of pests and diseases, and just really excited about this potential input. There is some ways that this could all fall apart, particularly with white druplet reversion. No idea what it's going to do with fruit quality and storage life. I expect that it might hasten maturity, which may or may not be a good thing for particular markets. So yeah, just a lot of great questions here, and really excited about it. Thank you so much for your help with the poll today, and all your support and attention here. And I just stole this last picture from a book that my daughter's really keen to read, Jamberry. I read that to her last night, so I thought it was a great ad here. But thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure I'm over by a minute, so if there's time for questions, I'll take them, or feel free to email me if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Tom. I love Jamberry too. I read that book to my kiddo, so that's a good one. A lot of exciting research, and I was just thinking with Extend Day, I was surprised they didn't see a difference with botrytis incidence because it's supposed to decrease sporulation. You know, the UV deters that, so maybe we'll find something in the study here at Clemson. But really interesting stuff going on. Folks, I know we're at the time, Mark, but if you want to stick around and have questions, we can stick around and ask either Gina or Tom some follow-up questions. And I think Daniel was curious where people are at as far as their plants currently, where your leaves at, you know, how are things looking out in the field. So if you guys even wanted to share that kind of information, we can open the floor now.
Karen,
Hey, Daniel.
that was a joke because you and Gina have leaves behind you on blackberry.
I'm harvesting.
Buds and yeah, you don't want to see my crazy house behind me or my kid running through the background, but
So I just wanted to say too that that Sarah Villani is going to be talking about this cane dieback. So this is not just cane blight. So I feel like on floricane fruiting types too, we're seeing more of this dieback. So she'll be filling you in the future talk, and I'm not sure when she is, but just wanted to make sure that you guys know that it's not cane blight only, it's other pathogens we think might be part of this syndrome.
she's going to be on the Zoom call in March.
Okay.
So that will be March 18th for her talk. And the next talk, I'll go ahead and say this housekeeping piece. The next one's on February 18th from 9 to 10. So we'll do it at the same time, same, schedule each month. And Wayne Mitchum will be here and Dr. Hannah Barak. And for that one, if you're here during the actual session, you can get an hour of pesticide credits, but you have to be here live to get that. So for that call, we'll have at least one pesticide credit available. And I will send out a reminder email with the link and all that good stuff the day before and probably a week before, just to kind of give you guys an update. Does anybody have any questions about the research or the cultivar trials that we talked about today, or anything you guys want to share? That's appropriate, Daniel Shires?
Sorry about that.
Quiet group this morning. Well, if you have questions, you can always email them to Gina or Tom. And thank you guys for being here. Hope this was helpful. We'll post the recording on the Rubus blog and the Caneberry portal for folks to view later. If nothing else.
We'll send a link to everybody too, that where they are at. So in case you can't find them.
Right, exactly.